Welcome to the Purple Sky Thinking for Leaders podcast. This podcast is for you if you lead people, teams, or the organisation. You might be a leader or a manager yourself, or you might be part of the support team to help those people to be really successful. I'm Anwin Botwa. I'm the Leadership Success Coach and founder of Purple Sky Consulting, and I'm going to be the host for this podcast. My mission is to help as many leaders as possible to really love what they do. I want to help you to feel more confident, more capable, more effective, so that you can build and grow happy, healthy, more successful teams. This podcast is going to be all about helping you to love leading. We are going to be exploring topics and themes about leading in a way that will help you in your day-to-day, but also support your continuous development. The episodes are going to be conversations, and I'm going to be bringing you some expert guests. We're going to explore the topics that they're an expert in, and we're going to look at it in a helpful, insightful, but practical way. You'll be able to access this podcast on audio through your favourite podcast provider, but if you prefer, you'll be able to find us on YouTube to watch along there too. So to make sure you don't miss that or any other episodes, go along and subscribe. Whilst you're there, why not leave a review and tell me who you'd like me to interview or the topics you'd like me to cover in other episodes. This is the second part of a conversation with Tara Leach. If you've not caught part one yet, then you might want to start there. You'll find the link in the show notes. In this episode, we are continuing to explore how you can have conversations with your team about racism. As I mentioned in the previous episode, Tara and I have worked together on creating some guides to really help you in this space. A guide about the conversation and a guide about how to prepare for that conversation. Tara is an expert in her field and specialises in race equality. And it's been really brilliant for me to be able to work with her on this project. In this episode, part one, and the guides that we've put together, we're hoping to help you to take action on having conversations with your team about racism. Now let's get started with this final part of the conversation. We're going to be looking at how to explore the discomfort of these troubling conversations, this troubling topic. We're going to be looking at how to handle those who find this really challenging, learn more about privilege, what this might be like for somebody who is a person of colour in a leadership role. And also, we are going to look at how you can continue to keep the focus on leading change in this area.
A term I hear regularly, so we all hear regularly, and I hear this particularly in the space of EDI, particularly racism, is to be comfortable being uncomfortable. It doesn't fit right with me. I'm not sure the right way of describing it. And I'm fairly sure I will have used that term at some point as well, in a way of how do we get people involved in the conversation so that we're starting to have conversations, recognizing that it's a really, really troubling subject. And most people have some kind of personal, not experience of it, but fear around that topic and conversation. But I'm not sure it's about making people more comfortable. I don't know. What's your thoughts?
Well, when you said it, I had to laugh because I think I'm the one.
Are we blaming you?
You can absolutely blame me because I think I should have it written on a T-shirt in our previous organization because I use that expression a lot with our senior leaders. And the reason why I felt it was really important is because there was too much of a focus for me on making people feel comfortable. And comfortable and safe are two different things.
Yes, they are.
Because you can be safe, but be uncomfortable and challenged. They're completely different notions to me. So when I say be comfortable, being uncomfortable is, we were really clear about we're at point A, we want to get to point B without detour of going, we're too scared and we're not going to do this. But in order to get there, it's not a hayride in the park.
Yeah.
So there are going to be some very difficult moments and we have to be okay. So that's the comfort bit is you've got to be okay that they're going to be difficult moments. You've got to let those difficult moments wash over you and sit with them because that's where the growth happens. Yeah. It's like when I'm very tall. You obviously can't see that on the podcast. I'm a tall person. And when I was a child, I had what they called growing pains. because I was growing so quickly as a child. I think I was at 5'10" by the time I was 12 years old. So I had growing pains. But the growing pains came because I was growing. So I'm kind of glad I had the growing pains because I do quite like being tall. So you're not going to grow unless you might go through a little bit of discomfort in that growing. I think most teenage boys will understand that they grow like weeds at some points in their lives. But it's not always going to be uncomfortable. And every phase of that, we want to go from point A to point B, this is the direction we're taking, isn't going to be uncomfortable. There will be moments to kind of celebrate successes along the way. There's going to be people, and we talked about allies earlier, who I call, and this is just my word I used, was the naysayers. But when I talk to the organizations I work with now, I always, particularly when they're just starting out the journey, I talk to them a lot about that you're going to have naysayers. Just because an organization has decided we're going to have an anti-racist organization, we put out our anti-racism statements. This is the work we're doing. We're setting up to this charter. We're doing this work. Going to be people who were perfectly happy with the way things are previously. And just like if you were digging to put a new building in, you're going to dig up the rats.
Yeah.
And they're going to come out and you're going to have to deal with them.
Yeah.
And so and then there was a particular point, I can't remember if you were still in the organization or not at this point, but there was one person who was being particularly challenging in one of the departments. And I remember saying to our senior leader at the time, this is that moment I was telling you about being comfortable, being uncomfortable. This is the moment. It is here. I talked to you about people who are not going to like necessarily what the university is doing. And how that comes out could be, they might just be silent. They might just be the ones who are in the back of the room in the team, not saying a word, not engaging. And ultimately, we can't change the way people think. And I don't think I want to necessarily change the way people think. If someone doesn't like me because my skin is brown, they don't like me because my skin is brown, I'd rather know, to be honest. But I can talk to you about your behavior in the organization and how you're acting, because we set out standards for behavior in all organizations. So, and it's not comfortable having those kinds of conversations with people. In that particular case, he was incredibly disrupted in a session that I was asked to facilitate on. And someone else in the room was so uncomfortable with those actions that they filed a formal complaint. And it turns out that this person had been disruptive in similar situations before. So there was a formal complaint lodged against them. I actually had to give evidence and all of these things. But we were put into a very uncomfortable space.
Yeah.
And we could have just said, oh my goodness, we don't want to do this anymore. This just shows this isn't the right way to go. And I'm often saying, actually, this shows that you're on the right path.
Yeah.
Because it means that you're ruffling feathers. You're stirring things up, and it means you're on the right path. So you should be okay with that. It's not always going to be like this, but you cannot get to point B without having those trials and tribulations along the way. So you've got to be okay with them. So that's what I mean when I say.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I was going to say, and part of that is daring to say it, isn't it? Daring to say, actually, that's not okay. And that is part of really what we mean by that uncomfortableness. Is actually, this is about saying it. This isn't about sitting quietly and letting it go. Actually, it's about saying it and knowing that it will be uncomfortable for people. And that's part of it, though. That's part of how the thing starts changing. Because if we don't say anything, it just sits there.
It sits there and it festers. And it's the not saying it. It's the sitting there and it's festering. That's how it becomes normalized. And, racism is already normalized. We know that. But that's how it continues to be normalized as this is the norm and this is okay. And it's like every other struggle that we have overcome in this world. whether it's voting for women, whether it's, abolition of slavery, whatever it is, in order for people to have justice, things got to break.
Yeah.
No one has ever relinquished their power without a challenge. Oh, it's I've just decided that I don't want to be superior anymore. Go ahead and have my space. That has never happened, and it never will. People like being, whether it's perceived or otherwise, powerful. They like to feel superior. I mean, that's not everyone, but that notion of superiority is not something people are going to give away without being challenged.
And because there's no challenge to it, or not enough challenge to it, actually, sometimes there's an element of not necessarily being aware of it being in place.
Mm-hmm.
Unless if you're
that's actually
not the one that has it. That's definitely how my life has felt. I've never felt challenged by that in that way.
Yeah.
And therefore it hasn't had the same impact on me at all. But now that I am more aware, now that I understand it better, it's recognizing that actually we have to change things for that balance to shift. It won't happen just because we're wishing it to.
Yeah, it won't. It absolutely will not. I guarantee you. It's designed that you don't see, and I suppose we can use the word privilege, and we all have privilege. I have certain levels of privilege that other people don't. I just don't have racial privilege. But it's designed so that those who have that privilege don't see it. That's the beauty of its design.
That's just insanity of it as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. That's a very good word for it. That is the insanity of it as well.
And that's where we have these problems with privilege of feeling like, well, I'm now being marginalized.
See what I mean?
No. We are attempting to readdress the balance. That is not the same thing.
Yes, it is not the same thing.
It is not the same thing, but it means somebody having to give something up that they either didn't realize they already had. And that's, for me, I think, part of the problem. Sometimes there's a lack of understanding that you have had that power and privilege. And that's why maybe it feels difficult to give it up.
It's very difficult to convince someone who in other areas of their life, in particular, and there's kind of two ways you can look at it. Someone who's perfectly aware and enjoying their privilege isn't going to want to give it up, but they're aware of it. So they can have a great conversation with you, and they're going to tell you straight up, I'm not giving it up.
Yeah.
But then there's other people who are not aware of their privilege, particularly if they're struggling in other areas of their life. If they had to work hard for, the career that they have, or if they're from a working class background and they've always struggled financially, and they feel the lack of a class privilege. Someone who doesn't have other areas of privilege and possibly can't articulate those other areas of privilege. And I'm being incredibly vague when I say this. I'm not speaking about anyone or anything in particular.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to make the point about for others who are struggling in other areas of their life may not go, I struggle too. But it is different. It is different. And there's other kinds of struggles that even I won't understand. I live in England. While I do not sound like it, I was born in England. So I have that for the next 5 years, Burgundy passport, which I recognize the privilege of being born in the United Kingdom and being able to travel pretty much anywhere I want without thinking about it. I know people who are either asylum seekers or have gained their status over the years who did not have or do not have that privilege. I'm aware of it, but I could easily say, well, I'm struggling in this area, so I can't see your privilege because or your struggle because I feel that I'm struggling in another area.
Yeah. It's a really interesting area of understanding privilege. And I think, we definitely touch on resources to look at that in the preparation guides. If you're listening to us and this isn't an area you have a good understanding of, I think start here. I think this is a really great place to start. And I would probably say is a great place to start a conversation with your team as well, is around the understanding around privilege. And that doesn't have to be a tell me where yours is and sharing it in that way, but getting to a point of understanding that concept of privilege and how it might disadvantage people and has continually disadvantaged people as a result of that. But that there are broader impacts of that. And it's important that that's understood.
I think that's a really, really important point to make, particularly around the let's all sit in the room and tell us about the areas that you struggle in your life. It just reminded me, I was once in a training session, again, this was years ago, and the facilitators said, let's all shout out racist terms just to get it out of the air. I know. It was bad. It was bad. And
that hurts.
What? No. But people were hesitant. I mean, everyone in the room was mortified initially, but all it took was for one person to say one kind of somewhat innocuous thing. And oh my goodness, the floodgates opened. And I felt that was very uncomfortable. I don't necessarily think it's something you have to make people share their personal stories, situations, unless they want to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not forcing anyone, but if someone does want to share and feels comfortable, safe enough to be able to share something, it's also an opportunity to learn about each other, to learn about how people are different. It can also be an interesting way of sharing with each other about people's personal lives, but it should never be forced. Never, ever, 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 ever be forced.
Yeah, and I think that's where those, picking a topic and talking about a topic rather than necessarily the personal experiences, unless it's people, like you say, are really wanting to do that. And then I think it's still a case of actually, is that right for the first conversation? Make sure that the space actually is safe first. And by focusing on a topic rather than individual experiences, probably is a good way to test those boundaries of that safe space.
Yes, I completely agree with that. And check in with people afterwards, either as a group or individually, but check in with people afterwards.
Absolutely.
How you doing? This was I know this was potentially a difficult conversation, and I just want to make sure that you're okay, that everyone's okay. Anything we could have done differently? What do you think worked? Thank you for your time. Thank you for your sharing. All of those kinds of things go a long way.
So I'm going to just pick up one last question, I think, maybe two, but we'll try two. Let's go to these two. So this is particularly talking to somebody who is from an underrepresented race, and they might actually be the leader of that team themselves. They aren't sure how to handle that, or aren't sure they're that comfortable or confident handling the conversation. What's your thoughts on how they maybe should address that?
I think initially, the first thing is to acknowledge that is an incredibly challenging position to be in. I think historically, people of color in leadership roles are feeling it. And when I think of very good leaders, I see that they address this in many different ways. Some people are very open, they're very forward, and it could be a personality thing. Some people, I remember years ago when I worked for FE colleges, this one principal of an FE college I think it was Talent Grimsby, like a very, very far out, very white area that he has come in as the principal of the college. And I remember him telling me, well, he just makes sure he's in every single photograph. And that's one of the ways that he kind of challenges without actually challenge. So there's different ways of doing it, is the point I'm making, but it is a challenging position to be in. So my number one thing is protect yourself. Make sure that you feel safe, make sure that you feel comfortable. I do think potentially to be able to, and again, it will depend on the team. It'll depend on how that team already operates. If it's already a challenging environment, it might just very well be that that's just not something they can do right now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And they may need to work to get to that point. It may also be that they step out of that conversation and bring in someone from either outside their team or outside the organization. It could be like the EDI team. It could be other senior colleagues, or it could be that they bring somebody in. It will depend on the organization. So that's where that preparation and that thinking that you talked about earlier will come in handy. Getting advice, I think, is very important on how best to address that. Because if they're already having difficulty trying to lead, I know for particular and from experience that a lot of times, for example, Black women will have a difficult time leading because people just don't want to see a body that looks like that in a leadership space. And that's not always the case. It has been in my experience, but it's not always the case. So they might be fighting fires and not able to go there. Or it might be a really good working environment and it might be okay to go there. Yeah. So that notion about kind of that self-reflection is still the same starting point. It just might be that the action might look a little bit different.
Well, and the level of support might be that actually, like you said, do I need somebody else to facilitate, lead this conversation? I might want to be actively involved as a participant, or I might want to be nowhere near that, and I might want to let that team explore that for themselves, especially if I'm the only person of colour that would have been in that conversation. Yeah. But like you say, it might be that the team work really well together and are connected, and that as a leader, you're able to then kind of talk into that space and share, if you're wanting to, that there's a level of discomfort because you're the only person of colour in the room and you're now going to have a conversation about racism. And if that's possible, then that might be very powerful for enabling the discussion to be as safe as possible, actually. But there isn't any obligation to do that. And it has to come from a place because that feels right for them. That's what I think. How does that feel right to you?
No, I completely agree with you. Yeah, it's a little bit, for me, a bit more complicated because you just kind of have to, it's more of a get the lay of the land, and you'll know the lay of the land. And then you'll have to make steps according to the way that team works. Absolutely. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't still do the work. It just might look a little bit differently.
It might look different, but I think it's okay to be uncomfortable with that and to call that out and to look for the support that you need because of those circumstances, because that's just reality as well. And I think that it's okay to find that difficult and to want to do things in a certain way that enables you to feel comfortable as a leader in that space. Yeah. And that's no different whether it was this or something else. It's like, how do you help you be in the right space to lead that well? And that doesn't have to mean you do it. That's no different from other things. So that's okay to have permission for that. I think it's absolutely fine. So last question. How do I keep from being discouraged if I'm finding doing this difficult, or I'm maybe not getting the level of support I'm hopeful from the organisation?
I think you might need to step back and kind of understand that you're not here to solve racism in the world, in the UK or even in your region or even in your organization. So if you've gone in with very lofty ideas about I'm Superman and I'm more Superwoman, I'm coming in to save the organization, then you've kind of come in with the wrong intentions as well. But if you are, genuine in what you want to do and one of the things that we've talked about, and you're still not seeing either any progress, it might be time to step back and reflect on why that might be. It might be that you need to do a little bit, whether it's on yourself, whether it's doing more research, whether it's talking to people, and that could be either friends or family, or it could be professional. So you may, have a conversation with someone like me or a coach. Those kinds of things might help. It also might depend on what is causing that feeling of discouragement. Why don't you feel encouraged about what's happening? Is it a particular person, or is it that the team doesn't want to engage, or is it that the team is really great but the organization is just not supportive? So it might depend on a lot of different things. You might need a mentor as well, but I'd also say celebrate the small things. It's not going to be easy. It might also be 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but celebrate the small achievements in the work that you're doing. Well, we didn't exactly get to where we wanted to be, but oh my goodness, we've been able to do this, and that's great for us.
Yeah.
How am I going to build on that? Everything difficult and challenging that we do, whether it's a PhD, whether it's a massive project, you're always going to have moments where you think, why on earth did I start this? It's not going well. Nobody wants to talk to me or engage with me. But just keep going, really. Keep going and, keep going, talk to people, whoever it might be, and celebrate the achievements.
I love that. I think,
but keep going.
Because your point at the start was absolutely, remember the intent, remember why you started to do this. And like you say, I love that piece around there will be progress that you're making just from starting those conversations and celebrating that and looking for all the positive in there. And to reflect on why it feels like discouragement or why that's what you're feeling, and explore that, because there's probably growth for you as a leader in understanding that as well, not just on this topic, but more broadly. So explore that with yourself through, like you say, a mentor, asking your team those questions of why is this stuck? Why are we not making progress? What could we do about that?
Yeah.
That's a great way to kind of get under that a little bit. Anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think that's okay.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that feels okay.
That feels good. So thank you so much for taking part in this conversation today. I found that really challenging in lots of ways, but also incredibly energizing in terms of actually there's loads to go after here. You can do this, and it's the support's there, but start somewhere and start giving it a go. And I'm sure that the people listening to this today will have found your insights and your expertise that you've shared with us today really helpful to take those steps further forwards in that work. So thank you so much for that.
We hope that this conversation, and part 1 of it too, has helped you to feel more prepared and ready to take action on having conversations with your team about racism. If you have any follow-up questions or comments, please do leave them in the comments section, or feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or at anwen@purpleskyconsulting.co.uk. A big thank you from me to Tara for all of her work, her expertise and her insights while we've been working on this project. Thank you, Tara. And finally, thank you for joining this episode of the Purple Sky Thinking for Leaders podcast. You'll find all the resources and the links that we mentioned down in the show notes. If you love this episode, why not share it with somebody else in a leadership role who you think would find this useful? If you haven't already, I'd love for you to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And if we've earned it, why not leave us a 5-star review? I'm Anwen, your host, and I look forward to welcoming you back to the Purple Sky Thinking for Leaders podcast very soon. Bye for now.